Well, good afternoon. I'm Lewis Moore, and I'm president of Friends of Garland's historic Magic 11th Street, your host for this afternoon's event. Thank you for giving of your valuable time to be here. And we understand that it's the weekend and it's Saturday afternoon, and we appreciate very much your presence. We hope this will be a very meaningful experience for you. As we've mentioned at our previous annual meetings held at the Granger Center right here, this is the literal birthplace of Garland. Right where we sit was the early days village of Duck Creek, predecessor town of Garland. On this spot in the 1840s was a rudimentary community center that also housed a church, a school, and was used for other events like this. This was the only thing that was out here. This was a very rural setting. So we know that we occupy very special grounds where we're sitting today. But before the early day settlers, however, this land felt other feet. As we always do at the start of every one of our events, we solemnly acknowledge that the original stewards of this land were first Americans. In our case, the Kickapoos, the Tawakanee, the Wichita, and the Humanos tribes. We know from history that their lands were stolen by genocide and forced migration. They were very brave people whose descendants still live in this county and in this area. We also acknowledge that we live and we work in an area whose economy was once built with the labor of enslaved people, whose efforts were used to build wealth that their children never got to enjoy at all. And we regret that. This acknowledgement is but a small gesture to our organization's larger commitment to showing respect to all people through awareness and action. Not only is this our In Their Words Symposium, today is also the annual meeting it's the 2025 annual meeting of Friends of Garland's historic Magic 11th Street. Our bylaws specifically state that we have to hold this meeting this time of year, once a year, and the public is invited, and we're glad to have every one of you here joining us. And we try to enliven our annual meeting with topics, with discussions, with programs like we're going to be doing today. It's also interesting for us that today marks the 50th meeting of our board of directors. We began in 2017, and we've grown dramatically. And amazingly, all of our original board members are still with us, except for the late Kay Crossman Turner, and we honor her memory today. So now I'd like to introduce you to our current board. Besides myself as president, we have the Honorable Christopher Ott, who is our vice president right up here, Kay Moore, who is our secretary, and Fred Downs, way back there, who is our treasurer. And we have original board members, Roger Poor and Kenya Ott. Kenya, where are you? Wave at us, Kenya. Way in the back. And other board members now, these are newer board members as we've expanded and our board has grown, are John Combs. Where are you, John? There you are, waving real big. Don Hallman, who is not here, but who is represented by her husband, Stephen. She had a conflicting, another committee meeting. And the Honorable Robert Vera, who was here, but he is ill, so he has gone home. And our newest board member, Debbie Scott. And I want Debbie to stand up, and I want you to get to know her. We are so glad to have her. be a part of our board. At our annual meetings, we recognize the nonprofit's accomplishments of the past year. We'll now show a brief video highlighting those. If you're familiar with any of our events, you know that music is always a part of what we do. And that's how we tell our stories. And we've performed 4 musicals that tell different parts of Garland's history. And what you're going to hear in this video is a prelim to what we're going to do a year from now. It's a big secret. I'm not going to tell you. But we have already started planning for next year, and it's a very exciting, going to be an exciting event for that one too. But if you're listening real carefully, you might be able to pick out the words to Who I Am. Who I Am. That's the title of the theme song for our 2026 gathering. You know that when we started about 12 years ago trying to build Garland's first historic district, Scott was right there with us, meeting at our dining room table and discussing these things. So we're very indebted to you, Scott. We're very appreciative of your being here, and if you will come and have a few words and
Thank you.
introduce these things.
Thank you. And I just need to clear up. I'm leaving office. I'm not leaving Garland. Now, I may frequent the Texas coast more than I have in the last 18 years, but you know, I still have a house I'm paying for over here, so I'm not going anywhere. So, but thank you for having me. I want to introduce our councilman, and I have to do them in numerical order or I completely mess up their names. I don't know why. District 2, Chris Beard. Here we are in District 2. District 5, Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Margaret Luck. District 7, Dylan Hedrick. And last but certainly not least, you know, we have 8 districts, Chris Ott. And then former council member Deborah Morris here as well. I think that's, and Annie, what? Yes, Annie Dixon. Sorry, Annie. Yes. And I just talked to you like 4 minutes ago. So, and from our GISD board, Robert Selders. All right. I think I'm done with the introduction part. That is always the most treacherous part of these events because you're going to forget somebody. It's just going to happen. But anyway, thank you for the invitation to be here today for the 50th meeting. 50th. I mean, that is amazing. You know, that, you know, in a time when civic and social groups, clubs, associations, whatever you want to call them, are and have been in great decline, to the point where some of them are no longer. You know, they have just disbanded. And to have a group that, you know, now up to 10 board members, but to see a group that's not just surviving, if you will, but is actually thriving and is continuing. You know, the groups that aren't with us anymore, that aren't around anymore, it's not that they finished their work. It's not that they completed their mission. It is just simply lack of participation. It is just simply lack of participation. And so my compliments to the Friends for doing the work and staying together. And, you know, it has been, you know, it's been a fun journey over the last however many years I've been in office. But there have been some constants in my life during that time while I've been in office, and Lewis and Kay are absolutely a constant that has been. Lewis and I served together on the Plan Commission. I mean, it just, you know, they have been involved. We have been involved with each other. I have great appreciation for what you've done, and as I've probably said every time is, it started out as preserving the places, okay, the buildings, the structures, the places. But the group has morphed, if you will, into preserving the people, the memories, the people who built the places, a lot of the times. And that's one of those things that is easily lost. It's easily lost to time and history and distractions and all of that. So I thank you for your efforts, for continuing. I know that you will continue to produce events and musicals and all of that kind of stuff. You have contributed greatly to our cultural arts here in Garland, which I am a huge supporter of, so thank you for that. And at that, I will say, here's to the next 50 meetings. Thank you.
And if you will stay up here for just a minute.
All right. That's all the speech I have, so
Our Vice President.
I was winging it some of that time, so.
All right.
Uh-oh.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our annual Magic 11th Street event. Today we have the special honor of recognizing a leader who has been with us from the very beginning of our efforts to preserve and celebrate this historic district. Mayor LeMay was a brand new council member in 2014 when the work to save the Pace House and restore 11th Street first came before the city. From that moment on, he has been a consistent supporter, not just in words, but in action. He attended our very first 11th Street gathering when we became Garland's first local historic district, long before we even started our home tours. Since then, he has been present for nearly every major milestone, attending our annual meetings, performances, and historical marker dedications, often speaking and encouraging us all along the way. He has always voted in favor of initiatives that support our work, including the awarding of Community Arts Commission grants. His wife, Tiffany, even served as a docent at one of our home tours, demonstrating their family's shared commitment to preserving Garland's history. But perhaps most importantly, Mayor LeMay has always gotten our purpose. His words of support have not only been heard at events like this, but have been featured on our website and social media because they truly capture the spirit of what we do. His leadership has helped ensure that Garland values and protects its history, and we are so grateful for that. As his term comes to a close, it's my great honor as both a member of the Garland City Council and Vice President of the Friends of Magic 11th Street Foundation to present this plaque as a token of our appreciation. Mayor LeMay, thank you for your dedication and service and your belief in the power of community and preservation.
You have enough hands? Make sure I'm holding it the right way.
Exactly.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Well, good afternoon. I think you'll agree that that was that film clip you just saw was riveting as well as poignant. What do you think? The 5-minute clip was the BBC who sent people over from England to do a 3-part series. And one of them had to do with race relations in the United States. And they couldn't do that without going to my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama. Are y'all hearing me?
This is not mine, by the way.
Yeah, it is.
Hello, hello.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, there we are. Okay, because I wasn't hearing it myself. Yeah, the film was shot by the BBC in their 100th anniversary celebration. And they came over to the United States to do what you just saw about segregation in the South. I got a phone call and a plane ticket to go to Birmingham, and they brought me over to my hometown to talk about what you just saw. And I got permission to show that here because it says a lot. You see a lot. It puts you in what I call cinematic realism. Puts you right there. You know, this past September, I traveled to Birmingham. It took my hometown of Birmingham to commemorate the 61st anniversary of the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church. Now, the bombing of the church led to several things: the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Federal Housing Act, a lot of pivotal things that happened in Congress was brought to attention of the whole world because of the bombing. I'm delighted to serve as a primary source, and I call to offer you my version of cinematic realism to guide you through this historical journey that I hope will enable you to be more effectively motivate yourselves and perhaps follow my footsteps and those of many others in increasing critical thinking that will lead to knowing our history, real history. You would also need to learn the sacrifices and the role ahead of you for giving back to others through volunteerism, leadership, and civic responsibility. You know, I grew up in this racial, turbulent 50s and 60s in Birmingham. And you know, it was tough, had to have been tough on parents. I'm a parent myself. And when I think about it, I wonder what was going through the mind of my mom and dad because of the situation in Birmingham. They basically had to teach us how to survive. And as you saw at the film, it may have been difficult. No, I know it was difficult for them to teach us how to survive without teaching hate. Because I had so many questions when I was growing up. Ken and I both had so many questions, and we would talk to my mom and dad about it, and they would struggle. They would struggle with trying to respond to us because the things that we saw were just absolutely ridiculous. Let's see. Let me give you an example. Y'all see what this is, right? A foot. Well, actually, this is what my mom and dad had to take to the department store to give to the attendant because we couldn't try on shoes. Imagine how I felt, 8, 9-year-old boy sitting there having to do this when I'm looking at a little white kid being measured and trying on his shoes. It was traumatic for us. And we kept asking questions, and why do people hate black people so much? What did we do? And when my mom and dad would give up on trying to explain to us, inevitably they would send us next door to my grandmother. We called her Nanny. See, there was no mental health resources for black boys and girls back in Birmingham. But Nanny was there. And she would talk about growing up in Waycross, Georgia, and going to Clark Atlanta University. And I said, well, why you come to Birmingham? Surely there are other places you could have gone. I've been watching TV. Why we have to live here in this mess? Is the entire country like this? And she would struggle and struggle and struggle. And finally she'll say, boys, if you want to overcome this issue of race, you need to pray, have faith, walk upright, and get yourselves a good education. Pray, have faith, walk upright, and get yourselves a good education. Debbie, would you stand up for a minute? My, you look nice today. I really like your outfit. Your suit is delightful. And just everything you have is just stunning. That could have gotten me killed, you can see. That could have gotten me killed. What I just did could have gotten me killed in Birmingham. If you crossed the, you can see, if you crossed the line over in the Mississippi, what it was, Money, Mississippi, Emmett Till, 1954, his life was taken away for doing something like that. Everything I saw on television were negative when it came to black people. you would see black men and sometimes women being escorted to the electric chair. You never saw them on TV at council meeting. You never saw anchors or anything like. It was always negative. Meanwhile, the bombings continued throughout Birmingham. See, that was the Klan's way of intimidating people to make sure that they didn't live in certain neighborhoods that they didn't want them in. Iron ore, coal and limestone were the main ingredients for making iron and steel in Birmingham. So that was the big business there. Now, don't miss this. We all know, or we think we know, that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1864, 65, something like that. But it didn't, because in Birmingham they had something called convict leasing. So if you got arrested for something, and you went to the Birmingham jail, in order to pay your fine, they would lease you to the iron or some of those mines, and most of the time you never came out of there. There were reports of mass graves of black men all over Birmingham because of leasing human beings. This was in the 50s and 60s. You know, I remember my uncle, my dad's brother, was walking down Fifth Avenue in Birmingham, and he passed by Jim Burke Buick. That was the leading Buick car dealership in Birmingham. And the new cars were in the showroom, and he just stood there looking into the window. The police stopped him, frisked him, took him to jail, guess what? For vagrancy. And back in Birmingham, they could call anything vagrancy. If you didn't have a certain amount of money or prove you had a job, who keeps the job badge with them all the time? They would take him to jail. And I remember my dad getting on the phone calling his brothers all over the country to take up money, collect money so that they could get a lawyer to get my Uncle Buddy out of the mess he was in, because he could have very well ended up in one of those mines. Dynamite was readily available because of the mining. It was rumored that you could buy dynamite at the hardware stores. And that's again what the Klan used as a means of intimidation. This happened over and over and over again. And my parents taught us what to do, but see, because we lived right around the corner from Dynamite Hill, Center Street. Angela Davis grew up at the very top of the hill. And Arthur Shores was a few blocks down, and Arthur Shores' home was bombed twice that I can remember. And every time that happened, it would shake our house. We were so close. And we were told to get on the floor, away from the windows, and not move until our parents told us to. Imagine kids growing up in a situation like that. And again, there was no mental health. Maybe that's the way I am. I see you looking at me, Rick, and said, now I know, huh? Now, Brown versus Board of Education was in 1954 that basically did away with segregated everything. And black kids couldn't go to school with white kids. There was an elementary school that I could see, Greenmount Elementary School. I could see it from my front yard, but I couldn't go to school there because on the other side of the school was an all-white neighborhood. And again, I visited my grandmother, Nanny. I said, well, look, tell me how much sense this makes. I can see the school a half a block away, but I can't go to school there. That makes no sense. And again, she said, Dale, if you want to deal with that successfully, you pray, you have faith, you walk upright, and you get a good education. Now, many of you probably think that Dr. King was the hero of Birmingham. He really wasn't. It was Shuttlesworth. Shuttlesworth. He was in Cincinnati, and he was called to a church, Bethel Baptist Church in Birmingham. And he was relentless in trying to make good the laws of the land. He would try to enroll his daughter in the Phillips High School, and every time he tried, they wouldn't bother her. They beat him. I mean, just beat him. And they would show it to you on TV. The Klan would give, the police in Birmingham would give the Klan 10 minutes to take care of Shuttlesworth, a minister. And all he was doing was trying to enroll his daughter into school. Schools, department stores, good jobs. There was voter suppression. Guess what? We're still dealing with that right now. Public transportation and rude, violent police. the equipment in schools, every time we thought we were getting new desks, the new desk went to the white schools, and we got the desk that came from the white schools. And they would leave messages on the desk. You can imagine the type of messages that they would leave. But we did with what we had, because what we did have were very smart, dedicated teachers who took care of us and made sure that we were prepared to move on to the next level. My mom was one of them. My Aunt Ruth was one of them. They worked hard towards educating black kids in Birmingham. There was one classroom, the art room and the band room and several others. We had to learn. First thing I learned in elementary school is how to put coal in a pot-bellied stove to stay warm in the wintertime. The white kids didn't have to deal with that kind of stuff. I get home, my mom said, "What's that all over you?" "Well, it's coal." Coal. But that's how we had to grow up in Birmingham. Dr. King was called to Birmingham by Shuttlesworth. Now, Dr. King's dad begged him not to go there. He said, "Man, you don't want to go there. Now, you did pretty good down there in Montgomery with the bus boycotts and Rosa Parks and all of that, but you fool around in Birmingham, the folks there, the good old boys don't play. They got a man, the police, y'all saw him on the film, Bull Connor, Eugene Bull Connor. And he said, 'Son, just please don't go.' But Dr. King insisted on going because Shuttlesworth had called him so many times begging him to come to Birmingham. Now, during this time period, my best friend was Al King. Alfred and Derek King. He was A.D. King's kids. They were A.D. King's kids, Martin Luther King's nephews. They were our best buddies. We went to school together. And so I know my parents had issues with the stuff that they were telling us about the movement because, they demonstrated and I wanted to demonstrate too because they were there. Meanwhile, Dr. King, in my mind, was a genius. He was brave, and I used to talk about his intellectual depth and oratorical genius. I loved to hear that man talk. I was over to Al and Derek's house one Saturday morning, and we were doing like what little boys do, making noise and running around, cowboys and whatever. And Miss King said, hey guys, y'all take the noise out in the backyard because your uncle is in there trying to get some rest. I said, wait a minute, Miss King, are you telling me that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is on the other side of that wall? She said, yes. I said, well, can I go look at him? She said, no, he's getting some rest because he has something important to do later on. And I kept looking at that door because I started to do it anyway, but y'all know what would have happened had I done that, right? And I knew better. And I stayed there as long as I could because hoping he got to come out sometimes. But I wanted to see him because I used to hear Al and Derek talk about him. I would see him on TV, and when he wasn't there at his brother's house, he'd be at the A.G. Gaston Motel where my dad was one of the managers. Incidentally, A.G. Gaston was a black man, first black millionaire in the country, I think. And one of his businesses was a motel there. My dad was one of the managers. Also, Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State Condoleezza, she went to school with me in Birmingham. Now, the demonstrations took place beginning or emanating from 16th Street Baptist Church. Now, I was smart enough to know that the Klan had been bumming any church, any person that participated in the civil rights movement. And I kind of thought about, well, why we still go to 16th Street Church, all that stuff going on there? And I wanted to go so bad because my friends were there. And I had kids in my classroom that were going, and their parents went. King had a brilliant use of the media. This was long before social media. He used the media brilliantly. Anybody in this room remember the Huntley-Brinkley report? NBC News? Yeah, y'all, some of y'all know, old enough to know now. That was the news report that my parents listened to or watched all the time. At first it was 15 minutes and then they expanded it to a half hour. Huntley was in New York, Brinkley was in Washington, D.C., and they gave an account of what was going on in the civil rights movement because they followed King everywhere he went. Now, King was smart enough. He would start his nonviolent resistance teaching at 16th Street Church 8:30 in the morning. But at 9 o'clock, they're coming down the steps headed over to Keller Ingram Park to go over to the government center where City Hall was, just to kneel down and pray. The media from all over the world was there. And King knew to do it because you would see whatever Bull Connor and his police officers did to them people on the 5 o'clock news. It was brutal, and you saw some of it. But King had a use of the media that worked brilliantly. Also, there was a boycott of Birmingham. If you couldn't work at a department store, why you want to spend your money buying clothes there? If you couldn't work as a pharmacist, why do you want to get your medicine? People would go to Atlanta or other states to get their pharmaceuticals just to make sure that they dealt with the boycott. And not a soul would go downtown and buy anything. You know, during the movement, you would see some of the leaders that would wear denim clothes, jackets and stuff. That was Dr. King and Shuttlesworth's way of showing, I'm not going to deal with the boycott. I'm not going to buy any new clothes for Easter. And you know how black folks, kids especially, dress up at Easter. Nobody went downtown. And it was one of the most brilliant things. You know, he did the same thing in Montgomery. He shut the bus system down in Montgomery because of what? Money. Economics. Something to think about. Initially, adults were dealing with the demonstrations, and they would get put in jail. As soon as they left 16th Street Church and go across the street to Keller Ingram Park, they would get beat up. The dogs would get them, eventually fire hoses, and they would take them to jail. Now, that posed a couple of problems. If the adults and mom and dad were locked up in jail, who was at home to take care of the kids? Now, Dr. King was asked over and over again by Shuttlesworth and by Bevan and a few others, let's use kids. Why not use kids in the demonstrations? And Dr. King didn't want to do it because he didn't want any of them to get hurt. And so he decided not to do it. Now, I don't know whether they played a trick on him or not, but they told him, you know, Doc, we know you leave town every now and then, go to New York and all over the place and speak, bring back money to bail these people out of jail. But, you know, you haven't been to jail. And so he and Fred Shuttlesworth and a few others walked down the street, and as soon as they left the A.G. Garrison Motel, they were arrested and put in the Birmingham jail. King, Abernathy were in solitary confinement. That was designed to play mind games with them. Meanwhile, 9 or 10 well-meaning white ministers in Birmingham wrote a letter and placed it in the Birmingham News, 2 pages. And it talked about, Dr. King, we know why you're demonstrating. We wish you would do the same thing. We want to do the same thing. We like what you're doing, but we want you to slow down a little bit, back off a little bit. And Dr. King was given the letter that they wrote by some of his people that came to visit him in jail. And Dr. King read it, and he wrote his own response to that. He said, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation was in, what, 1865? The Brown versus Board of Education was in 54. And here it is, 1963, the schools are still segregated, jobs, voter suppression and all of that. We don't have time to wait. So we're going to keep on doing what we do. And that became a letter from a Birmingham jail. He wrote in the corners of the paper, he wrote on toilet paper, anything he could find. And if you haven't read it before, please go back and check it out. I read at least once a year, a letter from a Birmingham jail. Now, Birmingham had 2 forms of government, Mayor. It had a mayor, well, it had a commissioner form of government. And Bull Connor was the commissioner for health and safety. He was over the police. Now, his other job that wasn't on his resume was he was the go-between the business community and the Klan. He was the strong-arm man. He was the bad man. He did all of this stuff to get to lock up black folks and kids. Now, while King was in jail, Bevel went to Parker High School, my high school, and some of the elementary schools and called these kids out, and they went to jail. My mom and dad kept a tight eye on me. Now, I don't think my brother was too interested in going, but I wanted to go. And they told me, that my mom told me all sorts of kind of stuff. They said, if you get locked up, I'm going to lose my job. I said, well, Freeman Robusky, Dr. Freeman Robusky now, he got locked up, and Miss Robusky's still teaching. Well, I had to end that conversation because you don't debate with mom. She told me, and it's my job to believe everything she said, and let's just move on, okay? But Birmingham had an election, and the election was to change the form of government from the commissioner form to a mayor-council form of government. They also, in the same election, they would elect a mayor and council if it was successful in changing the form of government. Well, the election took place. The voters agreed to turn to the mayor-council form of government, and all of the council people were elected, including Mayor Boutwell. Now, Boutwell was a racist too, but he wasn't nothing like Bull Connor. Check this out. The next day, Bull was at his office. He said he wasn't going nowhere. He said the citizens of Birmingham elected him for two years and he wasn't budging. And so we had a mayor and Bull Connor at the same time because they were afraid. Don't y'all miss this. They were afraid to do anything about it. Y'all know what Y'all know what I'm talking about. I ain't gonna say it, but y'all know what I'm talking about. Now, during the same time period, there were a few things done in Birmingham. Few people got jobs. They took some of the white only signs down from the water fountains, and you can go buy a hamburger at certain places and then have to go through the back door and all of that stuff. But there was a price to pay. May 12th, my brother and I woke up Sunday morning, and normally we would smell the coffee and the pancakes cooking because that was a staple in my house for Sunday morning. Then you get ready for Sunday school and church. But this time it was something else going on in my house. It was noisy. And the noises and the voices we heard weren't our parents. And we was in our rooms, and I remember a white man coming to the door of our bedroom, peeping in, had a gun on. We were terrified. My brother was so afraid, he got out of his bed and jumped in the bed with me. We were trying to figure out what to do because we hadn't seen our mom or our dad. And finally, our mom came in and said, boys, I guess y'all wondering who all these people are in the house. We said, yeah. She said, the AG Gaston Motel was bombed last night. And your dad was trapped in there for a little while. And A.D. King's home was bombed at the same time. Al and Derek's house, the King's brother's house. And she said, far as she knew that they were okay too. I said, Mom, how's Dad doing? She said, oh, he's fine. I said, look, do this. Go tell him to stop whatever he's doing with the media and the FBI and the police and whoever. Come let us know that he's okay. And so she went and got him, and he came to the room and he hugged us and he assured us that he was okay. That was May 11th, 12th, 1963. Now, I would hear my parents discussing whether to join the NAACP because one of the things that they did, Gwen, is that they would get the list of people who joined the NAACP and then find things to do. They would threaten your job, they would threaten your house, they would have the Klan come stand out in front of your house, anything they could do to intimidate you. I thought the NAACP was something, well, I still think it's something awesome, Ricky. But I was terrified, and I was hoping that my parents wouldn't do that because my dad had already been victimized in a bomb. Now, when we knew that my dad was okay. Again, we ended up over at my grandmama's house. We said, Nanny, this is getting kind of close. Dad was in a bomb last night. Al and Derek was in a bomb yesterday. We're terrified. We're scared to death. Let's move. Can't we move somewhere else? How about California? You know, I've seen it on TV. I have some uncles out there. Can't we go somewhere else? And my grandmother explained. She said, you know, it's not really that easy to do that. And we kept on begging and begging, and we cried even. And then finally my grandmother said, boys, if you want to overcome this issue of race and wanting to move, you need to pray, have faith, walk upright. Dr. King left Birmingham, and he went to Washington, D.C. to the March on Washington. That was August of 1963. 250,000 people converged upon Washington, D.C. All they were doing was demonstrating for jobs, for housing, for accommodations in grocery stores and in restaurants, and be able to go to a hotel. That's all they were asking for. 250,000 people from all over the country. Don't miss this. They didn't beat up the police. They didn't go to the Capitol and take down stuff and ram it through the windows and stuff. They didn't do awful things once they got inside. They were just people demonstrating, American citizens demonstrating for their civil rights. That was August 28, 1963. Now, the Birmingham schools were finally integrated. And the Armstrong brothers who lived behind me, there was an alley separating our backyards. And Mr. Armstrong was a barber, so they couldn't fire him. And so he got his sons, Philip and Michael, to integrate Great Mountain School. Now, they took them over there to sign up, but they wouldn't enroll them. Mr. Armstrong had to take his boys to court. And the court case lasts 10 days. Now, why are they in court when in 1954 the Supreme Court said do it, but not in Alabama because of states' rights? Attorneys Constant Baker Motley, Oscar Adams, and again Arthur Shores, my neighbor, accompanied those boys to the school, but finally after 10 days. Now, you can go in my backyard and see the FBI and the federal marshals in the alley behind the two houses for 2 years. They were there 24 hours just to protect the Armstrong brothers. They even had a conversation with my parents saying, you know, Dale and Ken the same age as Floyd and Dwight. That's what they are, Floyd and Dwight Armstrong. So you're going to have to keep an eye on them too. And I used to joke and say we're the most guarded house in the whole world because we had the federal marshals in the backyard. They sat in the alley. Then they walked into school every day and sat in the classroom with them. No wonder my mom and dad wouldn't want us to integrate because imagine the pressure on those kids with having to be escorted by the federal police in order to safely return home. They started September 10th. September 15th rolled around. And ultimately, the Klan did everything they could to keep the schools from being integrated. But on September 15th, Sunday, it was Youth Day at 16th Street Baptist Church. That was when the kids took over everything going on in the church service except for the sermon. And the theme was the love that forgives. Imagine that. My mom took Ken and I and dropped us off at church to go to Sunday school. Normally, she would park the car and go herself, but she was a school teacher and her lesson plans was due the next day. And I later learned that school teachers all over Birmingham were doing the same thing. And so many of my friends whose parents were school teachers dropped the kids off, and then went back home just like my mom did. Ken went to his Sunday school class, I went to mine. And we had our Sunday school lesson, and we talked about whatever the lesson was, and then our teacher, Mr. Greer, went upstairs he was a deacon, to get ready for the church service. He left us in the library. Now we decided to talk about what boys talk about. This September, right? Who was going to have the best band? Who was going to have the best football team? And then somebody sent the church a box of American flags. And we found them in the library, and we started passing them out to each other. We didn't know what we were going to do with them. We just passed them out. And while we were doing that, as I recall, the building started to shake. Everything went dark, smoke everywhere. And we looked at each other and didn't know what was going on. And we looked at each other and ran. I ran out into the open space in the church, and I remember running into folding chairs because you couldn't see. The lights were out, you were in the basement, it was dark, it was smoky. And I'm running as fast as I can. You hit one of those chairs pretty good, you remember it. And I was running into people also because you couldn't see. But I did see a ray of light coming from the stairway that we used to get into the basement. And I started to run up those steps, and I was met by a police officer. Now, Mayor, if something happened here, God forbid, How the police get to 16th Street Church within seconds if they didn't already know about it? And I tried to get past him, and he blocked me, and he said, nigga, get back down in there. And I figured this was one time I ain't need to obey the police. I just kept running. I slipped under his arms and kept going. And I got on the outside of the church, and that was an eerie feeling because, again, I wasn't quite sure what was happening. I could see the pigeons flying from the church. It was a cloudy day, overcast day, I recall. And then I started to smell the pungent odor of gunpowder. Now, I guess you're asking, well, Dale, what do you know about gunpowder and you 11 years old? Cap pistols. Everybody had the cap pistols. And firecrackers, too, that's outlawed in Garland, right? Yeah. But I smelled the gunpowder, and I said, oh, man, they have bombed the church, which was one of my biggest fears. People were running everywhere. See, there was no relocation plan for people who were in a situation like that. And I was looking for my brother. And so I went back into the church. As soon as I walked down those steps into the basement again, fireman said, son, where you going? I said, I'm going to look for my brother. Can I do this? He said, go ahead. And you don't let an 11-year-old boy back into a building that just been bombed. You don't know whether it's a second bomb or either as a result of the first bomb, the building collapsed. But I made it to his Sunday school class, and I looked under the tables. I called his name. It was empty. And I ran out the second time, but I grabbed my clarinet. I was supposed to play the clarinet in the orchestra, but I found it that time. Grabbed it. I saw it on the way out. And I kept looking, and people were running around. Have you seen my sister? Have you seen my brother? Have you seen so-and-so? Have you seen Ken? And finally, there was a big oak tree that had grown up through the sidewalk in front of 16th Street Church. And as babies, we used to play around that tree. And I went to that tree, and there he was. He was standing there with Miss Effie McCall, his Sunday school teacher, my grandmother's best friend. It looked like she was holding on to 6 kids all at one time, and they were all crying, and one of them was my brother. And I grabbed him and asked him, was he okay? He said he was fine. And I started to walk away, and Miss McCall said, no, you stay here, because she knew she was responsible for both of us now. I said, Miss McCall, your hands are full. I see what you're doing. My dad is right up the street at work. And so we went to the corner, 16th Street, 6th Avenue, and stood to wait. And finally, I saw my dad running up the street. I'd never seen my old man run like that before. He was, full stride. And when he got ready to cross the street, the police stopped him. And he said, no, those are my sons. And he didn't wait for an answer. He kept going. And he hugged us like he had never done before with tears in his eyes, because he, too, had experienced it just 2 months prior. He walked us up to the A.G. Gaston Motel, and I could see the reporters, the news reporters who were incidentally staying at the A.G. Gaston Motel. These were white reporters and photographers from all over the world, because they weren't welcome at the Holiday Inn and at the Tutwiler and the other hotels, because they knew why they were there, to report what was going on in Birmingham. And they were seemingly arguing over the payphones as they were trying to report what had just happened in Birmingham. My dad took us back in his office that had just been repaired from the bombing, and he kept calling home trying to tell my mom that he had found us and we were okay. Every time he called, the line was busy, because people from all over the country were calling, trying to check on us. They knew we went to church there. And he kept saying, why is she on the phone? He kept talking to himself. He called next door to my grandmother and Aunt Ruth's house. Same thing, line busy. Called the other house, the Bradford, our neighbors. Lines busy everywhere. They had no call waiting back then, none of that. Finally, he got through, and he told my mom, he said, Dale and Ken are with me, and they're fine. Little shaken up, but they're fine. And she drove and made her way down to the A.J. Gaston Motel, a block from the church, pulled under the breezeway, and I believe she stopped that. She jumped out of that car before she stopped it good, and came in, and you could tell she just tears all over her face, and she hugged us and made sure we were okay and got us into the car, and she took us home. And when we got to the house, my grandmother and Aunt Ruth were standing in the front yard, and they asked us about what we had experienced. And we tried our best to explain to her. She said, was anybody hurt? We said, we don't know. And I said, Nanny, why do bad things happen to good people? Why did they blow up the church, God's house? You know, what happened to that song, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious? What does that mean? Nanny struggled with my question, but then she said, son, if you want to overcome this issue, what you just experienced, you need to pray, have faith, walk upright, and get a good education. Later on that day, around 5 o'clock, we found out that Addie, Denise, Cynthia, and Carol lost their lives. Those weren't just casual acquaintances. Those were our friends. We had participated in Easter plays and Christmas plays and the Vacation Bible School. We'd gone to church picnics together. Our parents and their parents were friends. I didn't know too much about funerals. I was 11 years old, and certainly somebody my age. Carol's funeral was Tuesday at St. John's AME Church, right around the corner from 16th Street Church. We saw most of it on TV. And I still can't remember how I got to 6th Avenue Baptist Church the next day, because the mass funeral with the other 3 girls was held at 6th Avenue Baptist Church. And Dr. King delivered the eulogy. And I tried to slip into the church, but they stopped me saying it was already full of people and no more room for me. But I heard Dr. King's eloquent eulogy on the PA system. And then at the end of the service, you saw some of it. I saw pallbearers bring 3 coffins down those steps at 6th Avenue. Their church was made similar to 16th Street Church. And there were 3 hearses waiting to receive the coffins. Dr. King was leading the recessional. There he was. I'd never seen him in person to that moment. He was standing next to the hearse as if to oversee what the pallbearers were doing. 10 feet away from me. Garland, that was the most powerful moment in my entire existence. I've been to the White House, I've shared the podium with the president and all of that. That was fine. But to be that close with the Martin Luther King blew me away. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run up to him and hug him. I wanted to shake his hand, but I was just petrified. I was just standing there. And as they loaded the hearse, the coffins into the hearse, a few years later, Dr. King wrote this book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? I would offer that to you as I'm about to go to my seat. Garner, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? But before I go to my seat, I want to share just this with you. Kay mentioned that I'd done Big Brothers, Big Sisters. See, because when my grandmother gave us her mantra, the day of the bummer, she added something to it. She said, pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. But boys, you were spared for a reason. God spared you for a reason. It could have been 4 little boys instead of 4 little precious girls. Make sure you find something to do to serve humanity, to do something for somebody else. I didn't know what that was at 11. But 10 years later, I found my way to Texas Southern to play in the band. See, I can still do it. To play in the band with that same clarinet. And I play as alpha because Dr. King was an alpha. And the very first meeting I went to, it was a brother there who was in law school, Frank Duffy. We still talk. And he told us about Big Brothers, Big Sisters. And I said, why are you telling us about it? Ain't nobody got no money, no cars, no time. But he said, just keep it in mind. And when I finished Texas Southern in '74, my first job was working for the space shuttle program at NASA, the Johnson Space Center. Imagine that. Little old Dale Long from Birmingham working for NASA. My parents were so proud. I'm talking about they walk around chest poked out. They know what I did, but son worked for NASA. And the first day on the job, a African-American gentleman came to my desk. He went to Wiley, and he played football for Wiley. And he introduced himself, and he said, if you ever have any problems, you want somebody to talk to, because see, the room I was in was full of white men. I was terrified, scared of them. I ain't scared of y'all. and really, it was new to me. And so before he walked away, he turned around, came back. He said, Dale, have you thought about being a big brother? I said, oh, man, there you go. Keep following me around. And he signed me up for one day. They had a program in Houston called Big for a Day. They took a kid that was unassigned and hooked him up with somebody like me that was thinking about it. And I took him to the Astros game. And we had a good time, but they made one mistake, Mayor. They gave me 3 tickets, one for me, one for the little boy. I took a date with the third one. And there was a young lady who had put a note on my car. She put the note on my car. I had to follow up with that, right? And the 3 of us went to the game. And all I did was, we were watching the game and stuff. I was visiting with her because I didn't have the advantage of going to the orientation. I didn't know. And then all of a sudden I started thinking, this ain't your time, it's his time. So I started talking to him. He told me that he went to a Catholic church. He told me what grade he was in. He told me he liked baseball. Then he said he was adopted. That means he had been adopted. He had been rejected twice. Somebody rejected him for his adopted parents to get him, and then his adopted parents had a divorce. And then I started thinking about it. I said, boy, his timing was perfect. Because at the end of the game, he tugged at me. He said, Mr. Dale, are you going to be my big brother forever? Yeah, that's what I said. Same thing. And so even though the event this was for me to think about it. I went home and shared with my roommate. I was single then. I shared with Pete. I said, man, guess what, man? We about to get a new buddy to hang out over here. And I became his big brother. That was the very first one. Now, Keith was in our wedding. I ain't married a lady at the game. Y'all know Ellen, right? We've been married almost 50 years. Y'all don't go back and tell her that. And look, don't even mention what I just said, okay? Okay. But I went to, Keith was in our wedding. And the hardest thing we had to do is to tell him that we decided to move from Houston to come to Dallas. And he seemed to be concerned. He said, hey, y'all can fly me up there and we can do it that way, huh? And so we did it a couple of times. And then many times we would go down to Houston to a Texas Southern football game, go by and see him, check him out. And then over a period of time, we lost contact with him. Now, that was big brother number 1. Fast forward, I had 8 in 10 years, and in 50 years. Y'all can clap for that, that's hard work. And one of my little brothers, and I'll tell you about him, Montel, he lived here in Garland. He had 2 brothers. Both his older brothers had been in Big Brothers Big Sisters, and he had just turned 7, and the Big Brothers Big Sisters program matched them to me and Ellen because we did a couples match. I was glad to have Ellen around because it's been a long time since I hung out with a 7-year-old. He was a crybaby. And Ellen would calm him down. But anyway, over a period of years, we got to be good buddies and stuff. And we were going to the Dallas Cowboys game. Y'all, I skipped church that Sunday. But Ellen was with me. And we picked Montel up, and he was in the car. And I thought he'd be so excited about going to the Cowboys game. Don't miss this. He said, Dale, have you heard about Trayvon Martin? Y'all know that's the young man that was killed in Florida by the vigilante. And I told him, well, the vigilante killed him. He said, what's a vigilante? And I had to explain to him about that. And then I found myself in the same situation my dad must have been. And my mama must have been when we kept asking all of these questions. He said, could that happen to me? How can you help me and keep that from happening to me? I said, well, some of it has to do with appearance. Some people don't like hoodies. I don't like sagging pants. Boy, pull your pants up. Pull the pants up. And then he said, well, what about the kids who got killed in Box Springs? Y'all remember that? And I said, look, man, anytime you find yourself in a situation at a party or something, because you're about to become a teenager. If you find yourself in a situation that you just know something's not right, keep money in your pocket, call your mama, call me. I'll come get you. That's what you do. But you have to be keen and stay focused and don't do anything, even if you see your friends doing it, because you might save their lives by telling them no. He kept asking questions. He wouldn't stop. And again, I'm thinking he should be all excited about going to the Cowboys game. I wanted to talk about the Cowboys. We were in a suite. Everything was free except the parking. He kept asking questions because the boy was terrified. And I started to understand he was really serious and terrified, and I struggled with how to respond to him. And then it hit me. I said, Montel, if you want to overcome, you pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. That will be the key for your survival and making something of yourself. And then you got to do one other thing for me. Now you know what being a little brother is. I need you to be a big brother yourself because you need to pass it on. So, Garland, that's the end of my story. I got some more to tell, but we don't have that much time. And thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was good. Well, everybody sit down before I can get back up here. Man, that was the most moving. Oh, what a fabulous talk. I appreciate that so much. I cannot imagine getting to stand and watch Martin Luther King Jr. I did get to spend about an hour with Martin Luther King Sr. once upon a time and talking to him. It was right after Mama King. It was right after Mama King had been shot and killed by that assassin in the church itself. And I thought that was moving. To just sit there and talk to him privately, as a newspaper interview, and the man's faith just grabbed me. I mean, you know, the fact what he had lived through, the death of his son, and then 6 years later, the death of his wife, both shot. It was just an incredible story. But what a man of faith he was. It was very, very moving. Okay, so that was great, and we've still got a whole lot more to talk about. We're going to talk about what was it like in Garland. But first, we're going to have some refreshments. We've got really, really good refreshments back here. And I encourage you to participate and then to stay and hear the rest of our program. A Tale of Two Garlands, Black and White. What was it like here? We've heard about Birmingham. And we know about Montgomery. What went on in our city?
Yes.
Welcome back to the second portion of In Their Words Symposium. We're going to call on 4 Garland citizens to do just that. In their words, what life was like during the same era that we were talking about in Garland. And we heard what it was like in Birmingham, and we know what it was like in Montgomery and some of the other places in the South. But what was it really like in Garland during that era? It's been uplifting already to hear Dale. That was just fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Thank
you
Dale.
So much. And we appreciate the glimpse that we got into the history there. But I want to talk about what it was like locally. It's easier to talk about far away than up close at hand. So I'm going to introduce to you our panelists. Over here on my left, which is your right, is Carol Montgomery, and everybody knows Carol in Garland.
I don't know that.
Everybody knows Carol. She's a lifelong Garland resident. Her grandparents moved here in the 1920s. And her grandparents were actually, they spent their Sunday afternoons socializing in the flats, like in the scene that you saw described in the the play, the musical, The Flats. And Carol lived with her grandparents and with her mother. And her grandparents and mother were real pillars in the original black community in Garland. They were also members of, and founding members actually, I believe, of Garland's first black church. The first black church in Garland was Sims Chapel. And the earliest recordings we can find are 1915, of when the church was founded. And the church building still exists out on the west end of town. And Friends of Magic 11th Street is working, and it's very difficult to do. But we are working on getting a historic marker on that site too. It's a very, very important site in the history of Garland, and Carol's family was very much involved in that. And Carol attended Carver School during the days of segregation. Setting her goals high, she attended college and got an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. She is very well educated, has done extremely well, and she became a teacher in Garland ISD. And then she retired, and she was so good and so missed, they brought her back. And she's my age, and she's still teaching.
That's old too.
I could not do that. Oh, amazing. She has been involved with a number of organizations in Garland. She's a real professional woman. She was a charter member of NAACP in Garland. She's been a board member and supporter of a number of organizations, including Friends of Garland's Historic Magic 11th Street, and we have really appreciated her support. She was the dedicatee at the Flats musical last spring, if you remember that. So the list goes on. I could just go on and read her resume all day long. But Carol is an incredible person. And then sitting over here on my right, your left, is Kay Wheeler Moore. She's also a Garland native. And her dad settled here in 1939. He came here to work for the post office, and then he eventually became the postmaster. And her dad brought her mother here as a young bride, 1941. And the family, very much a part of the Garland community, very much a part of First Baptist Church and Austin Street, the Church of Christ. Founding members of the Republican Party, and in Garland, the moderate Republican Party, and they were very active in politics and very active in a lot of the activities in the city. And Kay came through the Garland Public Schools. She graduated from Garland High School, 1966, and she, like Carol, went on to college and obtained higher education. Got a bachelor's degree in journalism, and then she worked on a master's degree, surprisingly, in theology, which was very interesting. She spent her entire work life as a professional journalist, author, and publisher. And Kay is like Carol. She's been involved with every aspect of Garland you can imagine. Garland is her home. Amazing thing is, these two women grew up here. They knew some of the same people, parallel lifestyles, they never met until about 2 years ago. They knew the same people, but they knew them through a different way. And that's part of the story of Tale of Two Garlands. White Garland, Black Garland. How did they enter? How did Garland exist during this? It was a small town. When Kay was born, the town, and Carol, the town was what?
About 4,000. About 4,000.
About 4,000 people. Can you imagine 4,000 people? And today it's a town of about 250,000. It's grown phenomenally, and their homes were within walking distance. That is what you find even more amazing, how we can have parallel lives and never ever know. And I thought it was really neat after Kay met Carol, she said, I wish I had known her all my life. I know we would have been very close friends. And it was a shame for Kay, she didn't know her all her life. Shame for Carol. They both could benefited from a closer friendship. So we're going to talk about this today, and my cohort, where is he? Ricky McNeil, and I are going to be asking the questions of what was it like for you, and I'd like for them to start by introducing a little bit about themselves, and I've got some hard-hitting questions here. Okay.
Well, as Lewis said, it was a very small town. When I entered the okay, how about that? Very small town. When I entered the picture, it was a wonderful community to grow up in. Lewis came on the scene in our marriage when it was a much larger town. It was hard to describe the village-like setting in which I grew up, but it really does take a village. That's not a hackneyed expression. There were so many people that helped me grow up. Most of them lived on my street, which happens to be 11th Street, of course. Privileged to live on my growing up street. But the banker, the pastor, the insurance man in those days, just men were in insurance. The bank president, my teacher, the piano teacher was next door, and so yeah, you couldn't get in. It's the old saying about you couldn't get in much trouble because you would be reported back to your parents before you could even get home. They would watch out for you crossing the street. Avenue D was just a little country lane back then, and certainly was not all one way, but you could cross Avenue D and your parents didn't have to stand out on the front porch and watch or stand over at the corner to be sure that you didn't get mowed down. You could walk anywhere. And so it was a very wonderful community. Churches were all within walking distance. My dad bought the property and built their home where he did because he said she could walk to school all 12 years. And that was the idea. I could walk to Central Elementary, could walk to Bussey Junior High, or walk to Garland Junior High as it was in that day, and then Garland High School. They were all just right there, except I mentioned Bussey. That kind of fouled up the works when I was, in the sixth grade. They built a new junior high on the other side of town and zoned us out there. So for a few years, my dad's plan was foiled. But got back to Garland High, everything within walking distance, and of course, church was just right down the street. So it was a wonderful world, but it was an all Anglo world, and never gave any thought to the fact that there was a parallel universe. I know probably one of the questions is going to be, what did you think of black people? I'll go ahead and answer that one. Didn't know any. Didn't know anyone that was black other than the lady that cleaned for my mom, Gertrude Taylor, whom I found out Carol knew is a neighbor, correct? And I just loved Gertrude. And she was so faithful, and I just thought she was just as sweet as she could be. But that was true with the only black person that I knew. And I'll just go ahead and tell one more little thing real quick about her. So Lewis and I became engaged, ultimately went to college, met, and became engaged. And I came home, my mother gave an engagement party for us, as was typical in that day. Big party, she invited all of her friends and got down all her silver and china and punch cups and everything. So I drove up from college that day for this party and walked into the kitchen. My aunts were there. People were hugging me. Congratulations, you're getting married. How wonderful. And as I proceed over to the sink, well, Gertrude was there washing the punch cups for my mom. Well, everyone had hugged me, and Gertrude turned around and hugged me too. And because she was happy for me. And I thought, I've never been hugged by a black person before. That was a very different experience. That was the first feeling. And the second feeling was, gee, she really likes me. You know, I just thought that Gertrude worked for us, and she was a very faithful worker, but I never thought about the fact that she might really care about us as a family. And so that was cool, and I hugged her back. But those were just some new emotions for me. And again, I was engaged to be married. I was 20 years old, and the first time in my life that I'd ever thought those thoughts. So just to give you a little idea of what life was like for me growing up.
Okay, Miss Carol, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Carol Montgomery. Carol Ann, by the way, if you call my house. And my mother would say, Carol Ann, it's for you. I grew up in West Garland. If you know where Grandy's is, if you know where that was 4 streets of an African-American community. And as a matter of fact, my grandparents' home is the only home that's left on Grant, which we're trying to get rid of right now, because it's been zoned light commercial. But okay, that was my world. That was my little world that I grew up in. My mother was a very special woman. My dad left my mother when I was 2 months old. So, of course, she went back to live with her parents and her 3 younger brothers. So I was blessed in that I had a lot of loving people around me. Kathy Jane, my next first cousin, I was so upset when she was born. I loved her because I had been the baby granddaughter for so long. But anyhow, I love Kathy Jane. But it was, when she mentioned about the village, it definitely was the village. At that time, African Americans lived in West Garland, East Garland. Some lived in the flats. Some lived in the country out north, I guess you would call it where Chris Road is. Some lived in the country south, over in the area beyond, south of Kraft Foods and everything. They worked for various farmers there. So we were scattered all around the Garland area. My grandmother was active in setting out onions, picking cotton. Our family did all those things because that's what you did to survive. I loved my school. I loved Carver. I am a member of Carver Alumni Association because that's what I knew. I loved my teachers. I probably could name all my teachers from 1st grade all the way through 12th grade because we were all there in that one little small area. And it was what you knew as a child. We had church, we had school, we had community. Now there were some small social clubs. My grandmother and my mother, along with a few other ladies in Garland, belonged to the 53 Club. It was organized in 1953. It was a birthday club, so they met from month to month at various members' homes. And you had to be prepared to give a $10 gift to whoever birthday it was. And I remember my mother had that purple cabbage, and she would use a toothpick, and she'd cut a Vienna sausage and an olive and a tomato and put it on that stick. I thought that was the most beautiful decoration. The one thing that they didn't pass on to me was the ability to cook. And I can clean. I was telling someone when I leave school on Friday, I go home, I clean my kitchen, clean my bathroom, change the sheets, wash a load of clothes, because I had to get all that done before I went to the winter ball last night. And that's just what I can do. I'm a fairly well organizer. I'm into logistics. I believe in organizing things. I'm a math teacher, so I'm very linear. But my family did all the cooking. So when we have Thanksgiving, they know I'm going to buy food. The only thing I can make is one of the salads that my cousin likes. I make it for her, and blueberry salad. It's almost a dessert. So I bring, I guess, to this community service. I have spent my life working toward helping others. I strongly believe in that. When I came home from college, I went to teach at Jackson Middle School. I was the first African American teacher there. So it was an experience. And Dale, I know what you're talking about working at NASA. I still wear hair, a lot of different hair. I have to explain to my kids I may be blonde tomorrow, and the next day I may be a gray African American whatever. And so they're used to it. But I remember one lady finally, they had discussed it enough on the staff, and one got the nerve to ask me, well, what is your real hair? And I said, the day I have my real hair, I'll let you know, okay? But it's been fun living in Garland for a period of time because of housing issues. My mom and I lived just on the edge of Garland on Forest Lane for about 12 years before we were able to buy a home here in Garland. So I've just done a lot of things and still hope to do more.
Well, thank you, Carol. We're so glad you're here. And this is my partner here, Ricky McNeil. Everybody knows Ricky anyway. Ricky, do you want to ask the first question, or do you want me to?
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me about your churches that you attended when you were growing up, because both of you attended churches. Kay went to First Baptist, and Carol went to Sims Chapel. Did you ever see a white person in your Sims Chapel church when you were growing up?
Not at that time. No, never did.
Can you remember the first person that ever came in?
Probably somebody running for political office. I think you came once. Okay.
I hope I wasn't the first one.
No, you were not the first. No, we were a segregated church, very active. And my grandparents were not founders. They came in 1922. The church was organized in August of 1915. But that was the only Black Baptist church. There was a Pentecostal church that was organized a year later in 1916. So they just came and joined in because they had been accustomed to going to church. So, and my church was fun. When he was talking about putting a coal, I remember we would sit around, 5 or 6 of us for Sunday school, and at a while, we didn't have the coal burning stoves then. We did have gas heaters, and we would all sit around because everybody didn't come to Sunday school when it was very cold. As a matter of fact, our pastor was an itinerant pastor. He came to us on the 4th Sunday. He had 3 other churches. He had a church in Shiloh, Plano in Plano, Texas, which is the largest African-American church there. He had a church in East Dallas and a church in East Texas. So we only had church service, worship service, on the 4th Sunday. But we had Sunday school every Sunday. And I have to say, I love worship, but I still am a Sunday school student. I love Sunday school.
Okay, Miss Kay, you're looking for something?
Yes. A tissue.
I thought it was your notes.
No, extemporaneous this time, believe it or not. Well, I was a member of, as I said, could walk to church, could have walked to several, but a member of First Baptist. And did I come and put? Where do I need to put that back in? So I get First Baptist Garland, which was just a block away. And it was, my cohort Allen, still here, there you are, could testify alongside me that it was back then the power church in town. If you wanted to be elected to public office in Garland, you became a member of a First Baptist church. That was, city council members were by and large from there, school board members from there, mayor, school board president. That's where you wanted to go, and we certainly have saw people that suddenly switched their membership. You know, they might have been Methodist or Presbyterian, but man, during that political season, they were good, faithful Baptist church members. That also, that was also the I'm not quite sure how to describe it, but that was the seat of the control of the wet and dry issue in Garland, and it was the organization there that was very strong that kept Garland dry for many, many, many years, and so it was the power church, where as far as I was, all of my teachers were members of First Baptist. So my, first through 6th grade, they were all. I would see them on Sunday, and we recreated that scene in the flats where your teacher was always always there at church, looking over your shoulder. But I kind of identified with that in a way because my school teachers were sitting down the road from me on Sunday mornings, so you couldn't ever not behave because they'd be watching over you all week long.
And your father was a member of Austin Street Church of Christ, and your mother was a member of First Baptist. What was the reason? Because I picked up something Carol said about their church. What was the reason that they chose for you to go to First Baptist?
Oh, yeah, they had a very live and let live marriage. They went their separate ways on Sunday morning, and everybody was pretty happy with that. But my dad insisted that at one point that my mom, she was trying to go and attend the Austin Street Church of Christ with him, where they would worship together, but they didn't have air conditioning there, and the Baptist church had air conditioning, and he just couldn't stand the thought of this fussy baby in worship, and he said, "I'll just take her on down to the Baptist church because they've got the cooler sanctuary," and so that's where we ended up. Was down at First Baptist.
I thought of that when Carol talked about the coal stove and everything. That's quite a contrast. Ricky, have you thought of the question yet?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Anyone ever been to the doctor? Anyone ever been to the doctor?
Yeah.
You know, when you first go there, they're real nice and cordial, and then they get a little bit serious, right? So I'm going to piggyback on that. And one of my favorite scriptures comes out of Galatians. It says, "Am I therefore become your enemy? Because I tell you the truth." So we're not talking about an indictment on Carol or Kay, but we're just trying to dig a little deeper, okay? Okay, so we talked about church. So given the fact that we had the two separate garlands, how did you feel hearing the teachings and preaching when you went to church, knowing that there was separation and knowing that there were racial issues? So how did you feel, Ms. Montgomery? Ms. Moore, how did you feel? Did you feel any hypocrisy? Kind of describe that for us, please.
You know, my philosophy about the times is it was the times. That's the way it was. In church worship, it was about worshiping the Lord. It never was about, well, we're the black people down here, the colored people, by the way, down here, and then the white people up there. That was never a point. Actually, I was in college in the early days of the civil rights movement, well, the 60s when I graduated. And I'll never forget, my mother told me, "Don't you get up there and get involved in all that racial stuff." Well, what did I do? I got involved with the sit-ins. But anyway, that's another story. But getting back to what you're saying, it was never a question. I never doubted the reality of my faith because I was in a black church and then there were the white churches. I never thought much about it one way or the other. It never fazed me that things were not right. Because, you know, I lived in a good world, y'all. My little world that I lived in was my world, my 4 streets. And then the people we knew in East Garland, the few people we knew in the flats, it was what it was. We could go downtown Garland and shop. We'll talk about that in another phase probably. But being blacks in a black church, not mixed, never fazed me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Carol. In fact, we've talked about this and shared the same sentiment. That was just the way it was. That does not make it right, but that was the fact of the matter. And if those in authority over you told you that things were a certain way, then, you know, as a child coming up, that was just simply what you respected. Your parents said that, your teachers said that, that's just what you believed. I'm going to jump way on down and over some other things that I hope we have a chance to cover. But I will tell you about when my husband and I were first married in our first church. that we were members of as a married couple. It was not in Texas, it was in Kentucky, where he was in grad school. So this was our first married church. And it was a Baptist church, but we happened to have a pastor who was very progressive. And in Louisville, he was very active. He was way before his time, but he was active in the civil rights movement there. And so he, in the pulpit, would preach along that line. And I heard some things from him that I'd never heard from a pastor before, and it really shook my world. And we would come home from church. I'll tell a little bit later about my hubby's role in helping shape some of my thought about this. But we'd come home from church and kind of get into it because he saw things differently. And I would say, that pastor should not have been saying that, and that's just wrong. And so we, process of over time, came to understand how he truly was speaking the truth. But I do remember that was very off-putting to me at first.
If you could go back to Garland, though, who is the first black person you remember ever going to First Garland?
Okay.
He attended something.
All right. Well, I think that Lewis is speaking of a gentleman named Willie White, who was a college student, fellow journalism major along with us. We met putting out the school newspaper in the Baylor journalism department. But Willie White was black, and he became a good friend. And so when we married at First Baptist Church, Willie was a good friend, and we invited him, and he attended. In fact, he gave us a full place setting of our sterling silver. And, of course, that is just unheard of, but that was pretty costly item back then. But that was just an example of his, he thought very highly of us, and we thought very highly of him. Invited him to our wedding, and so I think that what Lewis was driving at is he was probably the first black individual that ever was inside the sanctuary of First Baptist in any kind of worshiping role.
It never occurred to me until years later that we had done something revolutionary in that church. Willie was our friend, and we invited him. He was there, and I saw him during the wedding ceremony. I saw him sitting out in the audience, and when we went down the aisle, I spoke to Willie. I talked to him a couple of months ago. He's doing great, still lives in Livingston, Texas. But it's just amazing to think that because we got married in 1969, that was probably the first time a black person had actually gone to something at First Baptist that we know of. Now, Alan, you may know of somebody else, but I don't think so. That was just part of that culture. Okay, Ricky, you want to do next? You want me to? Okay, Kay, so at what point did you have an awakening about, wait a minute, the way it was not the way it should be? What was that particular episode that you remember?
Well, as I mentioned, we worked on the college newspaper when we were Baylor students. Lewis happened to be the editor, and I was a staff writer. That was during the time, the April, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and so our campus newspaper put out a special edition for the campus on that. And so we had to work very hard, got permission to stay out of the dorm that night past curfew to put out that newspaper. And we were walking over to the press, the campus press, to put that paper to bed, as it was done back in that day, and talking about Martin Luther King and the individual and sharing an umbrella. And the individual I was walking with said, this is man, what an event. And King was assassinated, and this is just huge. And I probably made the comment, not anything that I am pleased about, have quite a bit of embarrassment over. But at the time, I think I made a comment, something to the effect of, well, that might be a pretty good thing, King out of the picture. And that was, that reflected my thoughts back then. And the individual that I was walking with said, I think we better talk. That really, you need to have an attitude adjustment in so many words. Well, yes, I did, as you can see. And that individual became my husband. And so, but Lewis was very fortunate, even though he was reared in the South. His mom, you may have read some of his writings about this, but his mom and his dad both worked in Washington in the FDR administration, and I think Eleanor Roosevelt was one of his mom's heroes. As far as she was concerned, there was never any president after FDR. She would say, "Oh, what are those presidents?" It's FDR. But anyway, her even though she was reared in Oklahoma, her conscience was raised during that time, and she came back a different person. And so Lewis was reared in a different kind of environment that I was, in terms of being more progressive about race. And so we had some.
And my father was Chickasaw Indian,
Yes.
Native American, and he had lots of friends who were Native Americans. He had lots of friends who were black, lots of friends who were white. I remember as a child going with him to visit friends who lived in homes in the black community, just like going to visit homes of people who lived in the Native American community or the Latino community. So I grew up in a different world, and it was hard for me to grasp the segregation and why that was so important. And to me, Willie White was my friend. He's just my friend. And so it was an interesting dynamic that we had to work through early on. And now Kay has friends of all different shades of color, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in his sight.
I married well, as you can see. Did you want to ask Carol?
Well, I don't remember. When I left Garland, and I tell my kids this, they think it's so funny when I say I've never seen that many white people in all my life until I went to North Texas. And I was sitting in a lecture hall, and I was the only black person among 500 students. And both semester,
What year was that?
this was in 1965. I was North Texas State University. So I just tell them, I said, well, I just had never, I saw white people because we stood on the, right across from Garland Cleaners and Laundry and watched the Labor Day parades and the Christmas parades, but I'd never seen that many white people in all my life. So it was my awakening that things needed to be changed was when I went to college, because my family protected me. Our community protected us. Safeway shopping grocery store is where the boxing gym is, downtown Garland. You went in that store, you picked up what you were planning to buy. You did not touch things and look at things. I have been followed around at shopping centers. So I grew up with that attitude, Now my mother would have gotten my grandfather's 45 and killed somebody, white or black, who did something to me. But my awakening that we don't have to live this way came when I went to college.
And if I could just embellish that, because Carol, you told me that J.C. Penney was one of those places
Yes.
where you got
Yes.
followed around.
Yes.
And when you told me that, I thought of, well, goodness, J.C. Penney used to be out at Garland Road at Miller in the Garland Shopping Center, and that was a big deal for Garland. I mean, they had everything there. And the neat thing about that J.C. Penney store, there's a Subway there now and a Pizza Patron, it used to be a two-story J.C. Penney, and for Garland, that was a big deal because there weren't that many two-story anythings. And so for a white kid shopping in J.C. Penney, the biggest thing that you had to worry about was whether you could slide down that banister without someone catching you, you know, because that was just so cool. There weren't any banisters to slide down anywhere in Garland except J.C. Penney. And so that was my biggest worry. Carol had a different worry when she went to J.C. Penney. I never had to worry about someone following me around like that.
We didn't go back to J.C. Penney. There was a group of African Americans came out of Dallas who stole a lot of things out of J.C. and they never got over that, and I understand. And after that incident, we didn't go back to J.C. Penney because we could shop at Cannon's Dry Good. On Saturdays, you dressed as if you were going to church and got the Trailway bus and you went downtown Dallas and you could shop downtown Dallas. Okay? And you didn't have to go to J.C. Penney, or you could go Colin Davis. Now my mom, my grandmother were spiffy dressers, and to this day I wear a hat every Sunday to church in their memory, because I know that how you look was very important. Okay, and so we knew how to dress. We were poor, didn't know we were poor because everybody was poor, but we never went without food, and you could go to Dallas and actually shop. Now, as a little girl growing up, I have a picture of me in this little red and white dotted Swiss dress, which you can't tell because it's black and white. This is at the San Francisco Park, there by the bridge. My aunt had sent for my mother and I. I was about 2.5 or 3 years old, because my mother bought my clothes at Lee Nann's. Lee Nann's was a spiffy shop on the square in Garland. My mom bought my clothes there. And I never forget, when I went to college, my mother decided she no longer could dress like that anymore, because it was more important to pay that $25 for my room and my room basically for my board, because I was in off-campus housing. And it took me a while once I graduated from college for her to go back and dress like she used to dress, because that's who they were. I was looking at pictures in the photo album and looking at pictures of my mother and my grandmother. They had been to the State Fair of Texas on Negro Achievement Day, by the way, which many people never heard of that. We only could go a certain day when we finally were able to go. But anyhow, and they were dressed, just dressed to the nines to go to the fair. And anywhere they went, they dressed. And so I thank God that they instilled within me that it's important. I couldn't see myself wearing flannel, PJs, and house shoes to Walmart. And I'm highly offended when I see it. I'm just going to be honest with you, because that's just not how I was reared. So I didn't worry anymore about J.C. Penney, because we had other places we could go to. Y'all, I'm a math teacher, and I do a lot of demonstrating, okay? I tell them, watch the red bouncing ball. I'm in a red shirt. Let's go to the board. So when you see me with my hands, that's what I do.
All right. And Ms. Montgomery and Ms. Moore, we want to piggyback on just that appearance and myths, right? So coming up during that time period, there are obviously educated white males, obviously educated bankers, lawyers, doctors. How did knowing that those educated white males impact your thinking when there are myths out there about blacks may be this, blacks may be that, and knowing that those myths were not true? How did you feel about hearing those myths coming from educated people who knew that blacks didn't have tails, blacks, you know, Ms. Montgomery, we always have to dress to make sure we were trying to be accepted. So how did you deal with some of those myths, and knowing it's coming from educated people, not ignorant people?
Let me share with you a story. When the schools were integrating in the South, there was a person who was on the Garland School Board who said, "No niggers are ever gonna sit next to my child." Well, that person's child became a school board member. I was president of my teachers union in Garland, And I made sure that I sat next to him every opportunity that I had. Because we had a policy that we could have 3 school board members together, and they would not be out of line with board policy. And our union, when the Holiday Inn was open, before school started, we would have breakfast with groups of them. And I always made sure that I sat with, his son was a very pleasant young man, God rest his soul, and really, he was a pleasant young man, but I'll never forget that. So that was my perception of what I thought a white man thought about me.
Educated people, and you know, I equate that with people in authority as well. If they say to you, for example, when our TV screens began to be filled with demonstrations like we saw, Dale showed us, and the civil rights movement began to pick up steam, and people were talking about it, not just Huntley and Brinkley, but you know, locally. And so the comment universally, whether that was in the home, whether that was at school, whether that was our city authorities, the comment was, well, that's outside infiltrators, and our blacks, of course, blacks was not a word that was used in my growing up days, coloreds, but mainly Negras. I remember that my parents would think that they were being very polite if they said the word Nigra, Nigra, because that was a more polite derivative than that other word. So you would hear anyone in authority, educated, whether that was your city official, whether that was your pastor, your parents, our Negras, meaning local, Garland, wouldn't do that. That's outside infiltrators. And the other myth, our colored community, they don't want to go to our churches. They don't want to be part of our civic clubs. They don't want to go be part of our schools. They want their own. Carol and I have talked about that a little bit. Was that true or not? But that was, at least that's what was said. It was outside infiltrators. Certainly, it would not be. Even people were influencing Martin Luther King. He couldn't have come up with that on his own. That had to be somebody. Whoever that somebody was. But this is just not something that people really want, and it would never happen in Garland because our colored community doesn't want that. They want to be separate. That was the myth. And so if you were a child, if you were a young person coming up and you hear that, that's what you believe. That's what you believe until you get in a situation where you begin to think on your own.
Our good friend Mike Hayslip, as soon as I met him, moved to Garland. You know who Mike is, head of the Landmark Museum, Landmark Society Garland. Automatically had to be sure to make sure we knew it in any conversation that Garland had a huge number of Ku Klux Klan members. And his description made me think that they lived on every street corner and every house in Garland. Well, I know that wasn't true, but did either of you ever have any interaction? Did you ever see the Ku Klux Klan evidence in this town?
I never did.
You never did?
And again, you kind of knew your place.
You knew your place.
I mean, that was the way it was. And again, it wasn't looking, you weren't looking for being with people. You wanted equity. That's the bad word now. It was just equity, because when you talked about the desk, Dale, we remember the school books. The school books with the pages torn out and there was nowhere to put your name. because it was a hand-me-down school book from Garland High School. So nobody was seeking. You probably were right. We probably didn't want to be with you. Okay. Because I talked with someone just last week. It was my podiatrist. And he said, I think that the African American community lost something with integration. And I said, I think it was community. We lost the feeling of community. Okay. There were benefits with integration, getting a new textbook that was under adoption, those kinds of things. Having an access. I didn't get to take trigonometry at Carver because they had to teach trigonometry one year and algebra 2 the other year. So my year was the algebra 2. So I didn't get trig till I got to North Texas. So there were a lot of hindrances due to segregation. But again, it was not wanting to just mix as it was equity.
And if I could lead the witness here for a minute, but I just, that nugget that you told me about, and some of your friends were quoted as saying about how your teachers carried you around on a pillow, just gave you, because they were preparing you for the outside world, and not the outside world like we would have been prepared, to go to college, but your outside world was life after segregation, and that was something that we did not have to be taught. We weren't taught, but you all got people really looking out for you.
I want to say this in meeting other people about my age. Garland was no different from a lot of southern communities, Grand Prairie. The only thing that Garland didn't have that some of our communities had was a high school for black kids. My mother didn't get to go to high school. So my grandmother sent her through the 8th grade another year because there was no high school. If you wanted to go to high school, you had to move to Dallas or somewhere else. Carroll had a high school. They had high schools. And Garland, along with Hutchins and Grand Prairie and Hamilton Park area over there were no high schools at that time by African Americans. And we were held back in terms of, I don't know what my mother would have become. She was a wonderful mother, don't get me wrong. But what she could have become had she had an opportunity, the opportunity that she made sure I was going to get, that she didn't have.
I want to get back though, Kay, about the Ku Klux Klan. Did you ever? Did you ever? All right. Did you ever see?
You're hitting the mute, I think.
Okay. Did you ever see any evidence of the Ku Klux Klan in your neighborhood or in Garland in general? Did you ever hear anything about it, except for what we heard from one
On the news, it was something that happened somewhere else. No, did not see it here, any evidence of it. And we had, there are a couple of questions from the audience.
Okay. We got a couple of questions.
Ms. Moore, did you finish your comment?
Yes.
30 seconds for the question.
No, when did Garland schools integrate? When did Garland schools integrate, and what was the, I guess, how did that look? What was the backlash, I guess?
I think Mr. McNeil is probably the best person to answer that.
Garland started with stair-step integration in the fall of 1963, first grade at Central, where she went to school. A little first cousin of mine and another little girl from the neighborhood where we grew up went there. My cousin's mother decided to move to Los Angeles. And then the next year, Deborah, who was with her brother, started. But in 1965, under court order, Garland fully integrated. Now, most of the kids in West Garland who were in high school went on to Garland High School. My cousins had been in the band at Carver. They were in the band at Garland High School. And then there was a drought of kids who were forced. Some of the kids, they kept Carver open as a high school one more year, 65 through 66. and then the kids were forced to go somewhere. Okay. We couldn't understand why people would go to South Garland, but we had one student who did. I'm just going to be honest. We couldn't understand with that Southern theme in there on the wall, the slaves out there on the fields picking cotton and all that good stuff, but that was the way it was. But there was a drought. The kids who were forced to go there, that for maybe 4 or 5 years, they just really didn't do it. Then they finally got into football and in the sports and things like that. But it was initially in 1963 with stair-step integration.
We're going to take 2 more questions from the floor.
My name is Marie Hamilton, and my parents are original home. I'm sorry. My name is Marie Hamilton, and my parents were original homeowners in Hamilton Park. So you were talking about the schools. The schools back then, my parents moved there in 1959. The schools were from 1st grade to 12th.
In Hamilton Park.
Hamilton Park.
Prior to then, when it was Anderson Bonner.
Oh,
Okay, but see, that's what I'm saying. I have relatives who live there.
Yeah, I don't know this.
Yeah, they did. They built Hampton Park, around the time Carver. We got a high school in 1955, 54, 55. But I'm just saying, prior to then, when my mother grew up, my mother would have been 100 if she lived last year. There was no high school. Okay.
Well, I'm talking about Hamilton Park. I'm not talking about Hamilton.
Yeah, but that was before Hamilton Park was even created.
Right, exactly.
That was where the African Americans lived out
Right,
in that area. So
yeah.
there was a high school then because it was equitable what was going on in Garland.
Okay. I just want to make this thing that it was
Eventually, yeah, they did get a high school.
And then we'll come back to Mr. Moore so we can make sure.
We have to switch out too.
Jesse. Yes. We'll get these 2, then we'll go back.
Thank you. My grandmother owned Nicholson's Variety Store for 50 years, and I'm an old Garland boy. When I go down to the square, I never remember seeing whites only, or blacks only, or no blacks allowed. Did I just miss it? Or was that not there? And how did you feel when you went downtown Garland in terms of shopping? Was it, there were no signs, but was there a hostility there, or was it better than that?
From my childhood, my mother went to Cannon's Dry Goods. We went into Nicholson's. We went into Payne's drugstore, and that's the one we primarily went to. There were no signs because I don't remember even there being any fountains. That you could access. But I don't recall seeing it. I just saw it in Dallas. In Dallas when we would shop. Because when we got ready to leave, we had to eat at the back of the Trailway cafeteria. We had a separate area. In Dallas. But I didn't see. And now Lindy's, you remember Lindy's? Lindy's, we could get the ice cream there. Scott's Sandwich Shop, you remember that? Okay, but Scott's, where Chase Bank is, across from the Catholic Church, the black women cooked in that kitchen. You could go in the back and get a sandwich there. You couldn't go to the front. Where the tourist courts were, you vaguely remember that area down there? You remember that? But it was kind of unwritten, but it was known.
The theater had the restricted seating in the balcony for blacks and the separate entrance. Yeah, that was probably the only place that there was a sign that I recall.
So I have a question. My name is Ramona Harper, and I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up in Philadelphia. Yay! New to Texas, only been here a few years. So I never grew up under legal segregation. This is shocking for me to hear. And I'm sure probably my grandmother's day, that's not to say that there was not segregation in the North, because we know there was, but it was not legal. Here, it was the law. So my question, so this whole thing of segregation, I never grew up under it, and it's just appalling to me to hear these things. My question to you is, when did it finally really end? Because we know it didn't end in 1964. We know it didn't end in 1965. when did it really end? Widespread housing, theaters, public facilities? Because my knowing when it really ended gives me a sense of where are we really right now.
Right.
And this lady over here, Annie Dixon, was part of the ending of it. To make
Annie,
sure
why don't
that
you,
it changed.
Annie, why don't you speak to that, because you were highly instrumental in that happening.
You mean my term on the council? Oh, yes. I guess we were looking for someone to represent East Garland and the District 2. Okay. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, thank you. Okay. I was born and raised in Louisiana, well, Alabama, and then Louisiana. So my husband and I got married. We moved here. I was 21, and I worked real hard at Their Words Semiconductor. And then after I was laid off, I started looking around my community, and I thought, ooh, things have changed. And I started going to a council meeting. And when I went to a council meeting, I was intrigued at the council members on there making decisions about my tax dollars. And I go, wow, we need someone to represent. No one wanted to represent. Everybody wanted to complain, but no one wanted to do anything. Yeah. And then my friend, Gwen Daniels, said, why don't you run? I said, that wasn't a plan. So I ran, and the year that I ran, the day before election day, I got a call from the Mayor Smith at that time. And he said, Annie, you may want to rethink this, because the Klan is meeting at Le Ray Hubbard, and I heard they're trying to get people to make sure you didn't run. And he said, so what you gonna do? I said, election day is tomorrow. They can do what they're gonna do. Well, I didn't win, but I lost by a narrow vote. But I went back and I said, I got name recognition, I'm gonna do it again. So I became the first African American woman to serve on the city council. And I'm still waiting for another one to come. For you young people out there. And it was rough. It was in the 90s. It was in the 90s.
We integrated before then.
Mm-hmm.
We integrated, but for the like representation, and then we had an African American man.
Yes, Reverend Cole.
Cole had been on the
Reverend Cole,
city council.
Church on Dairy Road. He was the first male to run, and he didn't run a second term. When he was absent, they did things that undermined his ability to really serve effectively.
Wow.
Yes, and so we both trailblazers, and so I just thank God that I was used to do that. And then I worked real hard. Once I ran again, I won. I worked so hard. I ran again. I got elected a second term. Woo! And then I ran for mayor. And I came short of 47 votes from winning. Oh my goodness. But I set an example for Mayor Jones to see it could be possible. Thank you.
Our community integrated more around 69, 70. And you know, housing, again, it was selective, but you could move into, if you had the money and you get the right realtor, you could move where you wanted to.
This is such a fascinating topic and conversation. We have two other people I want to invite up here, T.C. Walls and Roger Poole. Okay, so why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourselves? Tell us a little bit about yourselves. Roger.
Hello, I'm Roger Poore, and I'm a descendant of the Halford family. You may know of Halford Road and Halford Park. Some people pronounce it Holford, but that's not the way we pronounced it. And so I grew up in Garland, and I graduated from Garland with Kay Moore right there, 1966. And I grew up apparently not far from Carroll, just across the tracks northeast of that Grandy's. No, and actually my mom's cousin owned Scott's Sandwich Shop. Yeah, and my experience was similar to Kay's about how segregated we were. I didn't realize how segregated we really were until I read the script of her play when she asked my biracial granddaughter and me to be in the flats, and I was shocked. And I said, I find this hard to believe. It was very educational to me, but one difference is when I was 3, my dad got a job in Kingman, Arizona, so I started school out there, grades 1 through most of 3rd, and I went to school with Navajo kids, so I was used to at least that much other culture. And when I came back to Garland, I was struck by how lily white it really was. Grandfather Will? Oh yeah. When my grandfather, I never met him, he died before I was born, but when he was editing and publishing the Garland News, the Klan had a plot to assassinate him, and I heard 2 different stories. One was they had this old World War I rifle that jammed, and they gave it up because of that and gave him the rifle. Or, I don't know if that was really true, they just got cold feet. Either way, they did give him the rifle that they were going to use to assassinate him. My brother still has it. He lives in Prescott, Arizona.
And that was because your grandfather had editorialized
editorial.
The Ku Klux
Yeah,
Klan.
thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's a missing element there.
yeah, thank you, Lewis. That's my story, mostly.
Okay, and TC?
TC is my friend name. My name is Thomas Walls. My experience with Garland is, it was all that we knew. That's just the way it was. And we would always have to go in Lindy, but we had to go in the side, couldn't come in the front. And you know, we're looking for history, so I hope it's no policemen in here. I don't know how long, you know, this thing go. When we would go in there, we would make sure we would pay for the sandwich, but we'd take some of those onions. That was for charges, you know. We had to go in the back, so we didn't want the onion. We just threw them away with just the idea we had to go in. That was just something we retaliated against. That's the best we could do. So that was just the way it was. Not saying that, you know, it was right, but that's just the way it was. And as far as you know, those school books, we didn't know. And you know, but the thing that was really troubling to me was, we would have to, during the first school, we would have to go through the books, and they would check all the pages that were torn, and then if they by chance saw a page that was tore after we had to pay for the book. It was already tore up. So these are just things. That's the way it was. You know, I had to go, and like as far as the sign. There were no physical signs, but you knew exactly what, you know. We would go in the store, said, "Boy, don't you touch nothing." And you know, this is the way things were in Garland and all over the world. Before the United States, not the world. It's just the way it was, and we just learned to adjust to the way things were, and you know, then. But since we didn't know any better, we were happy. Am I right, Jerry?
I'm sorry that had to be done.
But you know that's just the way it was. And to be honest with you, from my point of view, it's not too much better now. And
why would you say that?
We're still fighting the same thing we have for 200 years. And as I always say, it's not, okay, I'm gonna depend on y'all to kind of pull me back to what you want to do.
Go right ahead.
And to me, you know, you're talking about the educated people. The people that I call educated, the one that's got some sense. Now, you got some book-learned people. See, and if you had some educated people, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. But I want you to stop me now if I get too far. And really, it's what I call just plumb ignorant. And it's not just, it's racial ignorance. Some people are just ignorant. I knew a family once, 2 sisters, black family, 2 sisters' children. When they were younger, they played together. But one of the sisters' sister children went to California. And she stayed there while and grew up because she was young when she left, but when she come back, she was a teenager. And this is family, black family. And when she came back, now if you know, people in California got a different talk than these southern people. And when she come back, now I'm gonna use the words of the family. When she come back talking that California talk, you best get on back up that California and come back when you learn how to talk. That's ignorant. Now, I don't like you, don't know you, but I know you're a different color, and I just don't like you. That's say very much for me. So the thing is, but then again, and if you don't know, I'm a minister. So y'all might get mad at me for telling the truth. If we as children of God were worth the salt we put in our bread, the situation wouldn't be like it's in today. We're talking about same thing that we've been talking about for 200 years. But now, if we, as believers in Christ Jesus, if we would just follow God's plan, this would be a better place. We wouldn't be going through what we're going through today.
Amen.
If we would follow God's plan. Okay, thank you, brother. I think you.
Very much. Really incredible. You know, the reason we do programs like this, it's the old saying about people who forget their history are prone to repeat it. And I think we're seeing some of that today. Mm-hmm. And if we don't remind ourselves what it was like, and it's hard sometimes. I remember when we were going through the rehearsals for the Flats, and the young kids really said, this really didn't happen. It really didn't happen, did it? Yeah, I'm sorry, I grew up through that era, and I know it happened. And in the town I grew up in, they had the signs. I remember as a child seeing the sign that said, whites only on the restroom, whites only on the fountain, colors only on one restroom, colors only on the other fountain. And asking my mama, what's that about? And she was hard pressed to explain it. It's just the way this is. And I don't like the way it is. I've always been, I want to change our world. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it very much. And you want to say something, Ricky?
And just want to say, echo what you said, Louis, and Reverend Wallace and Mr. Moore. You guys are spot on. That's the way it was. One of the things that we can't do is get complacent.
Right.
And the reason I asked the question about educated people, and I consider all of us educated, we knew better, but it was the way it was. Now we know better now. What are we going to do now? Right? Because unfortunately, we have some generations that's not going to take what black folk took back then. I'm not advocating anything, I'm just saying black folk today aren't complacent the way they were back then, right? So, to Mr. Moore's point, to Mr. Wall's point, I'm from Louisiana. Put all the ingredients in the gumbo and we have a delicious dish. Yes. Put all of our collective intelligence, innovation, intellect together, we got a better gargle. So let's not allow that to rear its ugly head. But this is one of the conversations that's always difficult when you're talking about money and race, because very seldom will people let their guard down and really talk about it. So Ms. Moore, Ms. Montgomery, Reverend Walls, Reverend Moore, and also President Moore, thank you guys for having this forum so that we can progress and make our city the best ever, because I believe the best is yet to come.
Thank you all for coming. God bless you.